My family told me I was too old for their trip to Greece, leaving me to water the plants. What they didn't know is that the day they left, I found their tickets in my mailbox, canceled their entire vacation, and booked my own flight to Athens instead. I was born Helen Marie Sterling, became Helen Croft when I married Paul in 1970, and remained that person until my son and his wife decided I had become something else entirely, a fixer, a reliable piece of household equipment you could count on to water the plants and double lock the doors, but not bring along. "You're too old for long flights, Grandma," my daughter-in-law, Laura, had said, her smile tight and insincere, a performance for an audience of one. "Just watch the house. We'll bring you something back." They drove off in their large black van, my son David at the wheel, their two children laughing in the back, already dreaming of Greek beaches and fresh seafood. I didn't say a word, just waved from the porch like a character in a play who had just delivered her only line, watching them disappear down the quiet suburban street. The air smelled of cut grass and impending rain. I was invisible in my own home, a ghost left to tend the garden. But the next morning, I found their lie sitting in my mailbox, nestled between a catalog and a utility bill. A large manila envelope from the travel agency, unstamped and unsealed. My breath caught. They hadn't even bothered to mail it, a small, careless detail that spoke volumes. Inside, the documents felt cold and sharp in my hands. I spread them out on the kitchen table, like evidence in a trial I didn't even know I was a part of. Departure in 3 days. Athens. 2 adults, 2 children, seats 14A through 14D. My name was nowhere on the itinerary. Of course it wasn't. I was to be a memory they could conveniently access, a comforting thought of home, while they lived a life I was no longer invited to share. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. They hadn't just decided to exclude me. They had constructed a narrative of my frailty to justify their comfort, a story they told themselves so they could leave guilt-free, leaving me to be discarded like an old, outdated book, one they were embarrassed to be seen with. Their words echoed in the silence of the house. "You're too old. It's for your own good." The lie was not just in what they did, but in the false kindness they wrapped it in. My hands began to tremble, a familiar betrayal by my own body that I had learned to manage over the years. I did what I always did when the world tilted off its axis. I walked to the counter, filled the kettle, and made tea. That's what you do at my age. You perform a simple, familiar ritual. You focus on the steam, the warmth of the mug, the scent of bergamot, and you wait for the storm inside you to pass, for the hurt to settle back into its quiet corner. But as I sat there, the pale morning light spilling across the damning evidence on my table, I knew this was different. The storm was not passing. It was gathering. The teacup rattled in its saucer, a tiny earthquake in my hands. I sat in the armchair where I used to rock David to sleep, the fabric worn smooth from years of my weight, my grief, my love. On the mantel, a photo of my husband Paul, forever 35, forever smiling with that easy confidence I had fallen in love with. He had been gone for 20 years, and in his absence, my roles had been slowly, methodically stripped away, like layers of old wallpaper. I was once a wife, a confidant, a partner in a life we built together. Then I became a mother, a nurse, a cook, a fixer of broken toys and broken hearts. For the last decade, I had been reduced to just Grandma. Not Helen, not Mom. A presence in the background, muted and obedient, expected to be grateful for the scraps of attention tossed my way. They thought I would sit here quietly in this house full of ghosts, watering their ficus tree and waiting for the hollow cheer of their photo updates. Insincere messages like, "We miss you, wish you were here," would have pinged on my phone. Each one a small, sharp reminder that they were living a life from which I was now excluded. The betrayal didn't just sting, it felt like a final erasure, the closing of a book on a life I was still living. They weren't just pushing me aside, they were narrating a version of the truth where I was too frail, too old, too much of a burden to exist outside these four walls. But as I sat there, staring at the damning evidence on the table, something shifted. For the first time in decades, I felt something calcify inside me, a hardening where softness had always lived. The trembling in my hands stopped. The fog of hurt dissolved, replaced by a cold, steady clarity. I looked at Paul's picture. He would never have stood for this. He would have seen their casual cruelty for what it was. And in that moment, I realized I had been mourning my own life long before I lost him. I stood up, my movements deliberate. I walked to the old secretary desk and pulled out my address book, its pages softened with age, filled with the names of people who had called me Helen. I found the number for the travel agency and picked up the phone. My voice, when I spoke, was even and calm, a stranger to my own ears. "I'd like to cancel a reservation." The girl on the other end was polite, her tone professionally cheerful. After I gave her the confirmation details, she asked, "Can I ask the reason for the cancellation, ma'am?" "No," I said. The word was clean and sharp, a perfectly polished stone. There was no anger in it. Only finality. Just cancel them. There was a brief silence on the line, a flicker of professional confusion. "Of course, ma'am." I wrote down the new confirmation number on a notepad, the letters firm and decisive. I hung up the phone. This wasn't revenge. Revenge is a messy, emotional act. This was consequence. Their consequence. I was just the one finally acknowledging it. After hanging up the phone, I made another cup of tea, but this time I didn't retreat to the armchair of my past. I sat at the head of the dining room table, a place reserved for family gatherings I usually catered but rarely felt a part of. It was now my war room. From the bottom drawer of the mahogany sideboard, a place no one else ever looked, I retrieved my passport. The blue cover was faded, but the gold emblem was still bright. It was still valid. I then opened my laptop and reviewed my finances, not with the vague sense of a retiree, but with the sharp focus of a general assessing her resources for an unforeseen campaign. I had a little over $12,000 in my savings account. More importantly, I had a portfolio of municipal bonds that my father, a pragmatist to the end, had helped me set up decades ago. "A woman needs her own money, Helen," he had always said, his voice firm but kind. Not for leaving, but for staying on her own terms. I had no debts, no one depending on me. Not anymore. I wasn't just being paranoid, I was being hunted. And my own obsolescence was the weapon they were using against me. The game had begun, and they had no idea they were already several moves behind. With methodical calm, I went online and booked a flight. Athens, 1 seat, aisle. The confirmation email arrived instantly, a quiet ping that sealed my decision. Next, I called my neighbor, Carol. "Could you do me a favor and water the plants for a little while?" I asked, my voice light. "Sure, hun. Going somewhere nice?" she chirped, her cheerful curiosity a welcome dose of normalcy. "Just a little trip," I said, the understatement feeling delicious. There was no need to elaborate. The best strategies are executed in silence. I packed a single small suitcase. There was a liberation in traveling so light after a lifetime of carrying the weight of everyone else's needs. I chose my clothes with care. Comfortable shoes, a few simple blouses, my best silk scarf, and the navy blue dress I hadn't worn since Paul's funeral. I had packed it away not because of sadness, but because it made me feel sharp, powerful, and I had forgotten how to wear anything that wasn't designed for comfort and invisibility. Tonight, I was remembering. As I folded the dark, elegant fabric, I felt like I was reclaiming a part of myself I had long ago surrendered. This wasn't just a trip, it was a resurrection. The airport was a jarring symphony of metallic noise, hurried announcements, and the frantic energy of people with tangled lives. I hadn't flown in nearly 30 years. It felt like a foreign country, but I moved through it like I belonged. Pretending you belong is half the battle, a lesson you learn when you've been quietly invisible for too long. The gate agent glanced at my passport, then at me, a rehearsed, dismissive smile on her face. "Enjoy your flight, ma'am." It was the kind of polite condescension reserved for the elderly traveling alone, a mix of pity and impatience. I didn't answer. I just walked on, my hand gripping the handle of my suitcase, my boarding pass held like a shield against a world that had long stopped seeing me clearly. On the plane, I took my aisle seat. The seat beside me remained empty until the last minute, when a young man, perhaps in his mid-30s, dropped into it with a weary sigh. He had quiet eyes and a simple wedding band. "Long trip?" he asked politely as we taxied down the runway. "Long enough," I said. He offered a small, knowing smile and then, to my immense gratitude, turned his attention to a book, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I slept for most of the flight, a light, necessary sleep that keeps grief from curdling into rage. When I awoke, we were over the Mediterranean. I glanced out the window at the endless, impossible blue. That was the moment it became real. I had done it. I wasn't here for sightseeing or to collect memories for others to see. I was here because they told me not to come. I was here to prove that I was still the protagonist of my own story. In Athens, the heat was a physical presence, a warm, heavy blanket even inside the terminal. I took a taxi to a modest little pension on a quiet side street in the Plaka district, a place with clean tiles and a sense of dignified age. The woman at the desk spoke perfect English and called me madam, as if the words still held meaning, as if I were a person of substance. In my room, I placed my suitcase by the wall and sat on the edge of the firm, simple bed. I didn't cry. Grief doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it's just sitting perfectly still in a strange room, thousands of miles from everything you've ever known, and methodically cataloging all the birthdays and holidays where you smiled through the quiet pain of being unwanted. I sat there for a long time. The silence, a welcome companion. This was not an ending. It was a beginning. That first evening in Athens, I walked, not with a destination in mind, but simply to feel the ancient, storied city beneath my feet. I wandered through the winding streets of the Plaka until I found a small bakery where the air was thick with the scent of yeast and honey. I ordered a plate of fresh bread, a small bowl of olives, and a glass of crisp white wine. The waiter was kind, his eyes gentle, and he didn't rush me. I ate slowly, deliberately, without looking at my phone once. No one was waiting for an update from me. No one was expecting me to check in. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like something missing. It felt like peace. Permanent. Final. The next morning, I woke to a different kind of light, softer and more golden than the flat, tired light of my suburban home. I opened the shutters and let it flood the room. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my makeup bag and found a tube of lipstick, a shade of muted rose I used to wear before my life became beige and apologetic. Applying it felt like a small act of defiance. At the front desk, I asked for a recommendation. Not a tourist spot, I specified, somewhere quiet. The young woman smiled and wrote a name on a slip of paper. Try Onophiotika, she said. It's a little village tucked under the Acropolis, very peaceful. I went. It was a maze of whitewashed houses, their walls draped in vibrant bougainvillea, and narrow, winding alleys where cats slept in sun-drenched doorways. Everything was slow and stubbornly beautiful. I walked until my feet ached. Then I sat on a stone bench and just existed while young couples passed by, their laughter echoing against the old walls. No one stared at me. No one offered a helping hand. No one told me I was too old. Here, I was not an identity defined by my relationship to others. I was simply a woman, sitting on a bench in Greece. I thought of my granddaughter Amelia, 16 and full of sharp, funny observations. She was the one bright spot in a family that had grown dim. I wondered what she would say if she saw me here. I reached into my bag and took out a postcard I'd bought earlier, a picture of the Parthenon against a brilliant blue sky. I hadn't planned to write, but my fingers moved on their own. Dear Amelia, I wrote, guess where I am? The sea is bluer than you can imagine. I hope you're well. Love, Grandma. I didn't write to David or Laura. Their silence had been a statement. My postcard would be a question, one they weren't even aware I was asking. I never intended to meet anyone. That wasn't the point of this pilgrimage. But life has its own sense of timing, and it rarely consults you before setting something new in motion. It happened at breakfast 2 days after I arrived. I was at my usual table by the window, absorbed in the simple act of buttering toast, when a woman of about my age sat down at the adjacent table. She had silver hair swept up into a no-nonsense bun and eyes that were sharp and intelligent behind half-moon glasses. You use too much butter, she said, her voice dry but not unkind, with a faint French accent. I looked up, a smile touching my lips. Better than too little. She nodded, a flicker of amusement in her gaze. Fair. That was the beginning. Her name was Rosalie, a retired school principal from Lyon. A widow, she added casually, as if it were just another stamp in her well-traveled passport. She wore her confidence like a well-tailored coat, not ostentatiously, but with a quiet, unshakable presence. She was the kind of woman who didn't ask for permission to take up space in the world. We started taking morning strolls together, exploring the quieter streets of the Plaka. She noticed things I missed. A broken shutter painted a defiant lilac, the intricate pattern of an old iron gate. She didn't capture moments for social media. She simply observed them, her gaze sharp and appreciative. Over lunch on a vine-covered terrace, she told me about her students, particularly the troublemakers she secretly admired the most for their spirit. I found myself telling her about my garden back home, how the tomatoes refused to cooperate no matter how gently I spoke to them. And your family, she asked, her question direct but not intrusive. I paused, the wine glass cool against my fingers. They're fine, I said, the words feeling inadequate. Her eyes narrowed slightly, her focus sharpening on me. They said that to you? I nodded, the familiar shame rising in my throat. She didn't offer pity or outrage, the typical reactions that only ever made me feel smaller. She just took a slow sip of her wine, her gaze steady. You're here, she said, her tone factual and irrefutable. So, they were wrong. That night, her simple, powerful words echoed in my mind. They were wrong. It was a truth I had been too timid to claim for myself. Later, my phone pinged with the first message from my daughter-in-law, Laura. Did you check the garden? The sprinkler system's been acting weird lately. There was no "how are you?" no "where are you?" Just a question about the upkeep of the house I was supposed to be watching, a reminder of the role they had assigned me. I looked at the message, then at the moon rising over the Acropolis. I didn't reply. The next morning, Rosalie knocked on my door with a map under her arm and a glint in her eye. "Florence," she announced, the word itself sounding like a promise. "It's not that far by train. I've always wanted to see the Uffizi." She looked at me expectantly, her gaze clear and direct. For a moment, the old Helen hesitated, the one who planned, worried, and always put others first. The one who would have made a list of all the reasons it was impractical. Then, the new Helen, the one who canceled plane tickets and crossed an ocean on a tide of quiet fury, spoke. Why not? We booked the train tickets that afternoon. Two women over 70 buying one-way seats to a new country like a pair of reckless students on a summer holiday. We laughed about it over dinner, a genuine, easy sound that felt foreign and wonderful in my own throat. That evening, back in my room, I did something I hadn't done since I left home. I held down the power button on my phone until the screen went black. No pings, no alerts, no digital leash pulling me back to a life where I was merely a functionary, a groundskeeper for other people's happiness. I packed my small suitcase, carefully folding the navy dress, and moved with a slowness that came not from age, but from savoring the pure, unadulterated freedom of the moment. I didn't feel like someone waiting to be included. I felt like someone moving forward. The train to Florence departed just after 9 in the morning. We sat side by side in a quiet car as the Italian countryside rolled by, a breathtaking tapestry of vineyards, olive groves, and terracotta roofs baking in the sun. It looked exactly like a cheap painting Paul had once bought at a flea market. He had loved it, saying it reminded him of places he'd never been. I never thought I would see them for myself. We didn't talk much on the journey. The comfort of Rosalie was that she didn't feel the need to fill every silence with noise. It was a shared quiet, not an empty one. She simply understood that some journeys are internal, and the scenery rushing past the window is just a drop for the landscape that is shifting and reforming within. She knew, without me having to say a word, that this was not just a trip. It was a redrawing of my own map. Florence greeted us with warm air and the scent of stone and history. Our hotel was old and full of character, with a tiny balcony that overlooked a jumble of red-tiled roofs and laundry lines strung between buildings like impromptu prayer flags. "I want to see Botticelli," Rosalie declared, dropping her bag with a decisive thud. "And then I want to buy something ridiculous and expensive I'll never wear." We did both. The Uffizi Gallery was crowded, a river of humanity flowing through its grand halls, but the noise faded away when we finally stood before it, the birth of Venus. I had seen it in books 100 times, of course, a flat and lifeless reproduction, but standing in its presence was different. I felt something loosen deep inside me, a knot I hadn't known I was carrying. It wasn't just awe, it was recognition. Here was Venus, emerging fully formed from the sea, a symbol of beauty and love reborn from the chaos of the waters. She wasn't a girl, coy and uncertain. She was a woman, serene and powerful in her arrival, her gaze steady and direct. She was not asking for approval, she was simply being. It felt like looking in a mirror. I was emerging from the sea of my old life, not as a younger, restored version of myself, but as a complete one, weathered but whole. Later, we sat at an outdoor cafe where a charming waiter flirted shamelessly with Rosalie, and she, with her practiced, elegant wit, flirted right back. I watched, not with envy, but with a quiet admiration. She had a way of making herself feel vital and seen without pretending to be anything she wasn't. She simply inhabited her age with a grace and confidence I was only just beginning to learn. That night, we ate dinner on the Oltarno side of the river, far from the tourist throngs, at a small trattoria that smelled of garlic and old wine. Over plates of pasta with butter and sage, Rosalie looked at me, her head tilted. "You're different now," she said softly. "How so?" I asked, genuinely curious. "You sit taller," she observed, her eyes kind, "less folded." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded, feeling the truth of her words in my own spine. For decades, I had been folding myself smaller and smaller to fit into the shrinking spaces my family had allotted me. Now, finally, I was unfurling. Back in our room, I turned on my phone out of a deeply ingrained habit I was beginning to resent. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications, an electronic assault. 24 missed calls, 14 from Laura, the rest from David. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I scrolled through the text messages, a digital timeline of their dawning panic. "Where are you? Are you okay? Did something happen?" The questions were all about their own anxiety, their own disruption. Not once did they ask, "Why did you leave?" Then a voice memo. I pressed play, and my son's voice, clipped and strained with an impatience he didn't bother to hide, filled the quiet room. "Mom, please call us. The kids are upset. We thought you'd be home by now." I stared at the phone, trying to summon the expected emotion. Anger, sadness, guilt. But all I felt was a vast, quiet distance. Not cruelty, just space. Enough space to finally breathe. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about the disruption to their narrative. The reliable, predictable grandma had gone off script, and it was making them profoundly uncomfortable. Rosalie saw me looking at the phone, her expression unreadable, but she didn't pry. The next day, while she slept in, I wandered through a quiet part of town, finding a little shop that sold linen skirts and delicate silver earrings. I tried both on, looking at my reflection not with the usual criticism, but with a detached curiosity. Who was this woman in the mirror? She looked familiar, but her eyes held a different light, a spark I hadn't seen in years. When we met for lunch, I told Rosalie about the messages. She listened patiently, taking a slow sip of her wine before she spoke. "Their concern," she said, her voice precise, "seems to be about their own comfort, not your well-being." She was right. Her words were a clean, sharp scalpel, cutting away the last vestiges of my self-doubt. That night, as we walked back to the hotel under a sky the color of a bruised plum, Rosalie asked, "So, where to next?" I thought for a moment, a map of possibilities opening in my mind for the first time in my adult life. I was no longer navigating around the needs of others. The map was mine. "Lisbon," I said, the name tasting of salt and adventure. I've always wanted to hear Fado live. Rosalie grinned, a flash of genuine delight. "An excellent choice," she said. "Let's go." Lisbon welcomed us like an old friend, warm, a little disheveled, and full of a music you didn't need to understand to feel. Our guest house had blue-tiled walls and a small balcony overlooking a square where children played football until dusk. That first evening, however, Rosalie wasn't feeling well. A low fever and aching joints that settled deep in her bones. "It's nothing," she insisted, waving me away with a familiar stubbornness. "I've been worse. Go, see the city." But I didn't. I went to the small kitchen and made her tea, the simple, restorative ritual that had marked the beginning of my own transformation. I sat by her bed and read aloud from a book we'd picked up in Florence, my voice a low, steady murmur in the quiet room. The afternoon passed in a slow, peaceful rhythm. It reminded me of all the years I'd spent looking after others, my children when they were small, Paul in his final days. I had been a caregiver for most of my adult life, but this felt different. This wasn't an obligation born of duty or expectation. This was a choice. My care was not a currency to be spent in exchange for love or security, but a gift freely given to a friend. That was a form of power I had never recognized in myself before. That night, I cooked for us. Nothing fancy, a simple omelet with fresh tomatoes I bought from a corner vendor who smiled as if we were old acquaintances. We ate on the balcony, wrapped in shawls against the evening chill. Rosalie was feeling better. Her color had returned, and her sharp wit was beginning to sparkle again. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but clear after we had finished eating. "For the eggs?" I asked, a small smile playing on my lips. She shook her head, her gaze meeting mine across the small table. "For not leaving." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and took another sip of tea. The next morning, I woke to the sound of fado. A man was playing guitar in the square below, his voice full of that uniquely Portuguese feeling of saudade, a deep, melancholic longing for something beautiful that has been lost. It was a sound that could have broken my heart a few weeks ago, but now I just stood on the balcony, barefoot against the cool tiles, and listened. I let the sad, beautiful music wash over me without drowning me. It was someone else's story, not mine. I finally had a story of my own. The letter was slipped under our guest house door sometime during the night. No stamp, no envelope, just my name written in David's rushed, familiar hand. I sat on the edge of the bed, the folded paper resting in my lap like a small, dead weight. Rosalie saw it, but said nothing, a quiet act of respect for a battle that was mine alone to fight. I unfolded it slowly, as if it might crumble to dust in my hands. 3 short paragraphs, written with the cold courtesy of a business memo. "Mom, we don't understand what you're doing. The kids are confused. Amelia cried. We thought you were just upset, but this is something else. If you're trying to punish us, you've made your point. Come home. Let's talk. Please. David." That was it. The words hung in the air like shards of ice. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of their own actions, just an expression of their inconvenience, their confusion. He spoke of Amelia's tears as if they were a weapon, a tool of manipulation to bring me to heel. My absence had embarrassed them more than their rejection had hurt me. It was a classic tactic, framing the consequence of their actions as an attack launched by me. I folded the letter, the crisp edges sharp against my fingertips, placed it in the drawer beside my bed, and stood up. Rosalie turned from the mirror, one silver eyebrow raised. "So," she said, her tone light and dry as a good wine, "are we having breakfast, or are we mourning the weak penmanship of disappointing sons?" A laugh escaped me, a raw, surprising sound that caught me off guard. It felt like breaking a fever. Later that day, as I sat alone on a stone wall by the river, I thought of Amelia. She wouldn't have known about the canceled tickets. She would have been fed the family narrative, the story of my frailty. I took out my phone and typed a message, a small flag of truth in a sea of deception. "Sweetheart, I'm fine. I'm traveling. Not angry, not hiding, just needed a bit of sky. Don't worry. Love you." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The response was almost immediate. "Can I call you?" We spoke for 15 minutes, her voice a lifeline of simple, uncomplicated love. She didn't ask me to come home. She didn't lecture me or question my motives. She just asked if I was happy. And for the first time, standing on a bridge in a foreign city, I could honestly say that I was. Seville felt like fire in the bones, not just from the Andalusian sun, though it pressed down on us like a warm, heavy hand, but from the life that pulsed in every alley, every window, every late-night voice echoing across the ancient stones. It wasn't a city that asked permission to be seen. It simply was, bold, proud, unapologetic. Our hotel room overlooked a courtyard filled with orange trees, their sweet, heavy scent mingling with the distant, percussive strum of a flamenco guitar. That evening, we followed that sound and found ourselves in a small courtyard restaurant where a group was performing flamenco, not for tourists, but for each other. A woman danced, her face a mask of intense, focused emotion. I couldn't stop watching her. Rosalie leaned in close and whispered, "She's older than we are." I looked closer and saw that she was right. The woman was well into her 70s, her body a testament to a life lived with passion and resilience. Her feet struck the wooden platform not with the lightness of youth, but with the force of a lifetime of sorrows and joys. She wasn't performing youth. She was embodying a resilient, powerful age. She danced for herself, with no apology, a force of nature in a simple black dress. I felt a profound sense of recognition. This was what it meant to be fully alive, to claim your space, to refuse to be invisible. The next day, while exploring the breathtaking beauty of the Alcázar, I found a message from Amelia. "Grandma, where are you now? Your photo from Lisbon was amazing. I showed it to my art teacher, and she said you have a really good eye." A photo? Confused, I opened my phone's gallery. There it was, a picture Rosalie must have taken of me on the balcony in Lisbon, my arm resting on the iron rail, looking out at the city. My posture was relaxed, my face calm. I didn't remember her taking it. I didn't even remember looking like that. I looked free. I typed back, "Seville now. It's hot and stubborn and full of beautiful noise. I'll call you tomorrow." That night, I lay in bed, the distant music of the city a lullaby. I thought of all the times I had said, "You go ahead, I'll be fine," when I wasn't. The times I had held everything together while others lived their lives. Now here I was, in a soft cotton nightgown, in a city that didn't know my name. And tomorrow, I decided with a jolt of fierce joy, I would dance. Not for anyone else, but just to remember that I could. By mid-morning, my phone had logged 26 missed calls from David. I hadn't answered a single one. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done asking to be heard. Rosalie and I went to the market by the river, a vibrant chaos of shouting vendors and laughing locals. I bought a scarf, a brilliant sunny yellow. It wasn't a color I usually wore, but it felt like a statement, a small rebellion against a lifetime of beige. While Rosalie negotiated fiercely over a small jar of olives, I sat under a faded umbrella with a cold glass of lemonade and checked my messages. I don't know why. Maybe habit, maybe a foolish flicker of hope. There was a new voice memo, not from David this time, but from Amelia. Her voice was soft, uncertain, but clear. "Grandma, I don't know if you'll hear this, but I just wanted to say, I miss you. Mom and Dad are kind of freaking out. They think you're trying to prove a point, but I don't think so. I think you just got tired of being left behind. I would have been too. Anyway, I hope you're safe. You look happy in that photo. I've never seen you look like that. Just call me, okay? Even if it's just for a minute." I listened to it twice, then a third time. That last sentence cracked something open inside me. Even if it's just for a minute. Her recognition, her simple understanding of my pain, was a balm on a wound I thought would never heal. She saw me, not as a problem to be managed, but as a person who was hurting. I went back to the hotel alone while Rosalie went off in search of cheese. I sat on the edge of the bed with the yellow scarf in my lap, its bright color a stark contrast to the muted tones of the room. Then I picked up the phone and called. Amelia answered on the second ring. "Grandma." The relief in her voice was a physical thing, a wave that traveled through the phone and washed over me. I could hear background noise, a kettle whistling, the sharp footsteps of her mother across a tile floor. "I'm here, sweetheart." Oh my God. Wait, the phone jostled, a door closed, and then there was quiet. "I was starting to think you'd gone totally rogue," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "Not rogue," I said, a small smile touching my lips. "Just found something I'd forgotten I'd lost." "What?" "Myself." She was quiet for a moment. "I get it," she said softly. "I think I get it more than Mom and Dad do." I believed her. We talked for 15 minutes about school, her drawings, a boy she liked who didn't like her back. Normal things, precious things. Then she asked carefully, "Are you coming back soon?" "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "Can I see you when you do?" "Of course, baby." After we hung up, I felt lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because something true had finally passed between us. And truth, real truth, always clears the air. Granada was quieter than I expected, not silent, just respectful, as if the city knew the weight of the treasures it held and didn't need to shout about them. The streets were narrow, like whispers passed between ancient buildings, and the air carried the scent of oranges and sun-baked stone. That evening, while Rosalie napped, I opened the new notebook I'd bought in Lisbon. I hadn't written a single word in it yet, but now the words demanded to be released. At the top of a clean page, I wrote, "Things I've never said out loud." I wasn't always tired. I just got tired of not being seen. Every time you called me old-fashioned, I swallowed a sentence I should have said. I still remember how you looked at 5 years old when you gave me a rock you'd found in the yard and called it precious. It was the last time you gave me something just because. I miss being called by my name. The words flowed out, not with anger, but with the quiet force of a river finally breaking through a dam. The next morning, we climbed the steep hill to the Alhambra. My knees ached, a familiar complaint, but I kept going, not to prove anything, but simply to see it for myself. And there it was, a breathtaking symphony of arches, fountains, and intricate carvings that made me wonder how many hands had worked this stone, how many lives had unfolded within these walls. Standing amidst the tranquil courtyards, I felt a sense of profound peace. This place was a testament to what could be built with patience, vision, and a deep respect for beauty. Rosalie took a photo of me sitting on a stone bench, framed by light and shadow. "You look like someone who's remembered something important," she said, her voice soft. "I have," I replied, the truth of it settling deep in my bones. Back at the inn, a voice message from Amelia was waiting. Her voice sounded tight, nervous. "Grandma, I think Dad is starting to realize something's really changed. He asked if I'd heard from you. He looked scared, kind of like he knows he can't just apologize with flowers and act like none of this happened. I told him, 'You're not angry, you're just finished.' I hope that was okay." "It was more than okay," I typed back. "It was perfect." I attached the photo Rosalie had taken that morning. Me, at the top of the hill, hands on my hips, the Alhambra a magnificent backdrop. My face calm and resolute. No caption, just the image itself. A minute later, she replied with a single heart emoji. It was exactly enough. I closed my phone, lay back on the bed, and stared at the ceiling fan whirring slowly above me. Tomorrow, we would head toward the coast. Rosalie wanted to see the ocean again. I said yes, not because I needed the view, but because I finally had the space to want something again. We took an early bus to Cadiz. Rosalie claimed the sea air did wonders for her posture, but I suspected she just liked how the wind tangled her hair and made her feel difficult to contain. The city was ancient, smelling of salt and fishing nets, a place that felt real and unpolished. That evening, we walked along the beach as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The waves weren't dramatic, just steady, persistent, washing away the old to make way for the new. I walked barefoot at the water's edge, letting the cold Atlantic nip at my toes. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from David. "Please just let us hear your voice." The words were a plea, but they were still framed around his needs, his comfort. I stared at the screen for a long time, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. Then I opened the voice recorder app and pressed record. I didn't script it, I didn't rehearse. I just spoke from the new, quiet center I had found within myself, the sound of the waves a gentle accompaniment. "David, I'm not angry, but I am changed. I spent most of my life waiting to be asked, to be needed, to be seen. And I was, sometimes, but mostly, I was the background to your lives, the reliable foundation you took for granted. I don't say this to make you feel guilty. I say it because it's true. I love you. I always will. But I am not coming back to the role you gave me. If you want me in your life, it won't be as a backup plan, or a babysitter, or a name on an emergency contact form. It will have to be as a person, a whole one, with a life and desires of her own. I hope you understand. Good night." I hit send. The message flew across the ocean, a small digital declaration of independence. The sound of the waves felt like an amen. When I returned to the guest house, Rosalie was reading by the lamp, her half-moon glasses perched on her nose. She looked up as I entered, her gaze knowing. "You sent it," she stated. It wasn't a question. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of lightness. "How do you feel?" she asked, her voice gentle. "Like I finally said the thing I've been swallowing for 20 years. She smiled, a slow, approving curve of her lips. "About damn time." The flight home was quiet, not with peace, but with anticipation. I wasn't leaving something behind, I was bringing something back, myself. My house was exactly as I had left it, the plants watered by Carol, the porch clean, the key turning easily in the lock. But inside, everything had changed, because I had. I walked from room to room, touching the familiar objects, the edge of the worn couch, the chipped ceramic bowl on the table, and saw them not as parts of my old life, but as a silent audience for my new one. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table, letting the new, richer silence settle around me. It wasn't the silence of loneliness anymore. It was the silence of self-possession. An hour later, Amelia arrived. She didn't speak at first, just wrapped me in a long, quiet hug that said more than words ever could. She sat across from me at the table, her backpack still slung over one shoulder. "I liked your list," she said, her voice soft. I blinked, confused. "My list?" She smiled. "You left your notebook open in one of the photos from Granada. I zoomed in. I read it. Well, part of it. I didn't feel exposed. I felt seen." "I've been making one too," she said, reaching into her bag and pulling out a small spiral notebook. On the first page, in her bold, artistic script, she had written, "Things I refuse to inherit quietly." The belief that women outgrow desire. The habit of saying "I'm fine" when I'm not. The silence that comes after someone tells you you're too much. I read the list, my heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. "You're going to be all right," I said, my voice thick with emotion. She nodded, her eyes shining. "Because you were." Just then, the doorbell rang. A polite, hesitant sound. "That's them," Amelia said softly. I didn't move. A moment later, David stepped into the kitchen. He looked tired, older, and his eyes held a hesitant uncertainty I had never seen in him before. Behind him stood Laura, her usual armor of brittle confidence gone, leaving her looking smaller, more human. "We don't know how to start," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I stood up, my posture straight, my gaze steady. "You already did," I replied. "You showed up." They sat at my kitchen table like guests in a foreign land, holding their mugs of tea as if they were fragile artifacts. We sat in a silence that was thick with unspoken words, recriminations, and years of neglect. It was the same quiet I had lived in for decades, and now I was letting them feel its suffocating weight. I didn't rush to fill it. I let them sit in the discomfort they had so carelessly created for me. Laura was the first to speak, her voice unnaturally soft. She asked about my trip, her questions careful, respectful, hungry for details. I gave her pieces of the story. The taste of the pasta in Florence, the color of the sea in Cadiz. Not the whole thing. The whole truth, the raw, painful, beautiful truth of my journey, had to be earned. She didn't deserve it. Not yet. They didn't stay long. When they left, David lingered at the door, a stranger in the house he grew up in. "Do you want to come for dinner sometime? No big gathering. Just us, you and me." His voice was hesitant, hopeful. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no. That small space of uncertainty was a new boundary, and he seemed to understand it. The next afternoon, Amelia came by and announced she was applying to an art program in Berlin. "I know it's far," she said, her eyes searching mine for the disapproval she expected from her mother. "But I need to do this. I need to go." "You should," I said without hesitation. "Don't wait for permission. You'll miss your life." Her face broke into a slow, relieved smile. "I knew you'd understand." Before she left, she gave me a small envelope. Inside was a drawing she had made. It was of me on the beach in Cadiz, my arms open to the sea, the yellow scarf a slash of sunlight in my hair. At the bottom, in her elegant script, she'd written, "She didn't come back the same," and that was the point. I placed it on the mantel next to Paul's photo. He would have understood too. A few days later, a handwritten letter from David arrived. "I don't expect to be forgiven," it read, "but I'd like to try. Not to erase anything, but to build something better, if you're willing." I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with his first one. I didn't reply. Not yet. Some silences are meant to be honored. They are the spaces where healing begins. A week later, I called David. I didn't wait for him to find the courage. I took control. "Sunday," I said, my voice even, 5 o'clock. "I'll bring dessert." He sounded surprised, grateful, and most importantly, careful. As he should. Dinner was civil, a little stilted, the careful, awkward dance of a family learning new steps. The air was thick with things unsaid, but it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't the silence of erasure, it was the silence of consideration. Toward the end of the meal, David cleared his throat. I read your notebook," he admitted, his gaze falling to his plate. "Amelia showed me. She said it was important. I saw what you weren't saying. It hurt." I looked at him, my expression unreadable. "Good," I said, my voice calm and clear. He looked up, startled. "Good," I repeated, "because it means you finally heard me." He nodded slowly. I did. We ate the lemon tart. I brought in a new kind of quiet. Not uncomfortable, but earned. The kind you can share when people are finally learning how to hold each other honestly, without illusions. When I left, David walked me to the door. He hesitated before speaking, searching for the right words. "I know it'll take time," he said, the unspoken question hanging in the air between us. "I have time," I answered, letting him know that the door was open, but that he would have to be the one to walk through it. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out a thin envelope, and handed it to him. "What's this?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "A copy of the tickets," I said, "the ones I canceled. I kept them, not out of spite, but out of truth, so we don't forget how easy it was to erase me." He didn't open the envelope, just nodded and tucked it carefully into his pocket. We didn't hug, but we stood for a moment, closer than we had been in years, two people who might one day understand each other without needing to explain every bruise. Back home, I stood before the mirror and studied my face. I was older, yes, but not tired. Wiser, but not cold. The lines around my eyes and mouth were deeper, but they weren't cracks. They were paths, the visible map of the journey I had taken back to myself. Before bed, I wrote one last entry in my notebook. Things I no longer apologize for. Wanting space, wanting more, saying no, leaving quietly, coming back louder. At the bottom of the page, in small, firm script, I added one final line. I was never too old. I was just never asked if I still dreamed. Now, I don't wait to be asked. I go. The journey wasn't over. It had just begun. Helen's journey is a powerful reminder that it is never too late to reclaim the authorship of your own life and refuse to be written out of the story. For decades, she had been the reliable background presence, wife, mother, grandmother, quietly holding everything together while others lived in the foreground. But when her own family deemed her too old for their trip and left her behind to water the plants, she discovered the quiet strength that comes from refusing to accept someone else's version of who you are. By canceling their tickets, booking her own flight, and embarking on a spontaneous adventure across Athens, Florence, Lisbon, Seville, Granada, and Cadiz, Helen didn't just see the world, she saw herself again. Every city became a chapter in her personal rebirth. In Athens, she learned to walk without destination. In Florence, she stood before the birth of Venus and recognized her own emergence. In Lisbon, she found the power of caring by choice. In Seville, she witnessed the unapologetic fire of age embraced. In Granada, she wrote down truths she had swallowed for years. And in Cadiz, she sent her son the message she'd held back for decades, that she would never return to the role they had assigned her. Through it all, she built a deeper bond with her granddaughter, Amelia, inspiring a younger generation to refuse to inherit silence. Helen's story teaches us that you don't have to wait for permission to live fully. You simply have to decide that your life is worth taking up space for. It's a lesson in boundaries, self-respect, and the joy that comes when you stop existing for others and start living for yourself. If Helen's transformation resonated with you, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of courage, reclamation, and second chances. Your support helps keep these stories alive and brings them to those who need to hear them. And now, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments which region or country you're watching from, so we can see just how far Helen's message of freedom and self-discovery can travel around the world.